It's wonderful to be here. And actually, it's thrilling, and I applaud the Danish Agency for Culture in trying to collect information to create tools that help us understand something about our visitors and how we can better support them. And so that's what I'm going to talk about here is how to understand our visitors and better support them. The other sort of mini challenge, and hopefully I'm going to be successful here, is that I know that there are many in the audience here who have some familiarity with some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about today. So my goal is to not bore you with all the things that you already know, but to try and stretch and push you. But at the same time, there are many people who aren't familiar with these ideas, and so I have to bring them along as well. So hopefully we'll see how we do. So I'm going to begin this with a memory. I'm not going to read the memory. I'm assuming that you can read it yourself. A graduate student and I did some research a couple of years ago. I've done a lot of work over the years looking at what people remember as an indication, as sort of a indicator of learning. It is not quite the same thing as learning, but it tends to be two sides of the same coin. And this was a particular memory of a visitor that when we called them back after they visited a science center in Los Angeles, this is an excerpt of what they said. And then we looked at all these various memories that people had given us to try and understand what were the factors that seemed to be key that contributed to what people actually remembered. And there were four key things that seemed to be present in all of these various people's memories. There were things that supported their entering needs and interests. There were things that were novel. So the things that they saw that they thought were interesting, strange, different, tended to be remembered. Things that had a high personal, emotional connection to them. And then this is always the great one, which is a little counterintuitive. But the other thing that contributes to what somebody remembers about a visitor experience is what happens after the visitor experience. So that actually, if you really want to know what people have learned, you can't actually talk to people as they're walking out the door because often they won't know. So even if we tried to say, what are you going to learn over these 2 days? We can't assess that tomorrow. We would have to come back weeks, months, maybe even years later to see what of the experiences you had here actually were useful and memorable. So I'll come back to that. So by way of context, there have been a lot of efforts over the years to try and understand how to support the needs and of visitors. But disproportionately, they have focused on who the visitor is. They have disproportionately functioned on permanent qualities of the visitors. They've used demographic variables, or in the current survey, they may use these social values kinds of characteristics like gender and age and education, race, ethnicity. The good news is that these kinds of categories are descriptive. We can describe our visitors these ways. Unfortunately, they're not very actionable. So knowing that I visited your museum and was an older, because I am older these days, an older foreigner, what do you do with that information? Does that tell you why I visited your museum? Does that give you some insight into what motivated me to come, what I would do when I'm in your institution, what I would look at, what I would take away, or even more importantly, how you would satisfy my needs and ensure that I might want to come back another day? It's descriptive of me, but it's not actionable. And that's what I have been striving to do, is create a tool that might actually be actionable. So, we look at the 2012 National User Survey, and it summarized that the typical museum visitor is female, middle-aged, well-educated, etc., and the atypical museum user is male, young adult, etc. Does that mean that we don't want to target females because they already come? No. Does that mean that if I have vocational training, I won't show up at your museum? Does that mean I'm going to create an exhibition for a young adult who's vocationally trained? What does that exhibit look like? I mean, what do we do with this information? So here's what I'm going to propose. That if we want to know how best to support visitors and understand their learning, we need to focus not on who visits us, but we need to focus on why they visit us, or as the case may be, why they don't visit. Because each visit is a unique experience. It's a one-time relationship that is basically predicated on the visitor's desire to use the museum to satisfy their needs. Not your needs, not the museum's needs, their needs. And what it says is, as a white foreigner who's older, I can come to your museum 3 times and be an entirely different visitor because I'm coming for different reasons. I have different needs on different days. And framing me in that permanent box doesn't help you understand anything about your visitors, truly. So this is the premise on which I'm going to talk to you, and it's based on a whole bunch of research that I did. Now, I said I'm going to use identity as a framework, and I feel obliged to talk a little bit about identity, because we all have sort of a working sense of what identity is. We think correctly that identity is this stuff both internally and externally that defines who I think I am and how others think I am as well. So I may think that I'm really tall until I come to Denmark and everybody's taller than me. And then I think, well, maybe I'm not really that tall. Because when I was just in Asia, I felt really tall, but now in Denmark, I don't feel so tall. So my identity is constantly being negotiated by both my internal belief system, but also how I respond to others around me and how they respond to me. But here's the thing. We tend to think of identity as a fixed aspect, but it's not. We have many different identities. And as my friend Amar was talking about earlier today, I can see myself as an American. I can see myself as a male, but I can also see myself as curious. I can also see myself as a father. I can also see myself as a friend. I can be many things at many times. And that actually, as I have characterized it, we have both these big I identities, which tend to be the things that social scientists have focused on, things like demographics, permanent qualities. But we have so many other identities, which I've called little I identities, which are the identities that we have that are situated in the moment. At the moment, every one of you has an identity as an audience, and you're a very well-behaved audience. Thank you. If I asked you to tell me about yourself, who are you? Not many of you would say, I'm an audience. But right now, that is part of your identity. That is the role that you're playing. And people who visit museums come to satisfy particular roles and particular needs. And often those roles and needs have relatively little to do with their big I identities. So, I came up with this idea of visitor identity motivations as a way to frame how we can think about visitors, because people are actually coming to our museums to satisfy their identity-related needs. But it's important for you to appreciate that these categories I'm going to talk about are not identities. They are the motivations that people have for visiting that reflect their identity-related needs. And that these provide a way to sort of visibly see what's going on underneath the surface. Because the other reality is that people aren't even necessarily conscious of why they've showed up on a particular day. That doesn't mean they don't have a motivation for being there, but they may not be reflective about that motivation. But the other beautiful thing about this is the reason people show up. I mean, everybody has a unique, if you talked to every one of you today in this audience and asked you right now to write down, why are you here today? You all give answers, and the exact wording is likely to be quite varied amongst the 200 plus of you. But actually, if we analyze that data, we wouldn't find 200 reasons for showing up. There probably would be a relatively small subset of reasons that you showed up today, anywhere from there's somebody I really wanted to hear. Generally, this is a topic that's really important. Somebody at my institution told me I had to come. There would be a number of reasons, but there wouldn't be 200 reasons that you're all here today. You're here for a specific set of reasons because this situation, this context, affords you a reason for coming, but it's a subset of reasons. And it turns out museums are the same way. The public perceives that museums in general, and your institutions in particular, afford certain things, satisfy certain needs. And if I, as an individual, wake up on a Saturday morning and have that need, and potentially have had enough experience to think that a museum might be a place I could go, and if I match up my needs with the affordances of your institution, doesn't guarantee I'll show up there, but it increases the probability that I'll show up there. And that's what this is all about. This is not, this whole model that I'm talking about here didn't emerge because I wanted to create a segmentation strategy for museums to figure out how you go about marketing to people in museums. But it came from talking to hundreds and hundreds of visitors and determining that when I listened to all their reasons, there weren't hundreds of reasons. There were actually only a handful of reasons why people said they were coming to museums. And those reasons tended to be these half a dozen reasons. I came up originally with 5. You folks have added this additional category tag along. I've ultimately thought, well, maybe there are a couple more, and that's okay. I'll come back to that. But all the visitors to all the museums tend to converge on just a handful of reasons why people are coming. This is what they look like. Okay, there are these people that I call explorers. Basically, an awful lot of people show up your museum because they sort of generically like the stuff that's in there. They're curious, and they're coming to satisfy their curiosity. So you say, why are you here at the Arkin? Did you come to see a particular exhibition? Actually, no. In fact, your own data from this survey shows that the vast majority of people show up to these museums not even knowing what's on exhibition. We tend to flatter ourselves and think we're doing these great exhibitions, and people are coming to see them, but actually most people show up and don't even know what's on exhibit. But they do know that there's art here, and I generally like art, and so I'm curious to see what's here, and I'll figure it out. When I see it, I'll know it. There are an awful lot of people who come to institutions, not as many art museums, but certainly natural history museums, zoos, aquariums, science centers. Adults come to satisfy the needs of their children, or adults come with partners who they want to satisfy those people's needs. Sometimes people get dragged along. Why are you here? I'm here because my significant other, my partner, likes this stuff. So I'm going to please my partner today, and I'll go. Maybe tomorrow we'll reverse roles, and I'll go someplace, and he or she will come along with me. There are people who come because it's the place to see and do. So I'm here in Copenhagen. What do I do when I'm in Copenhagen? Well, you got to see, the palace and the harbor, the Little Mermaid. Maybe you should go see Arkin. I don't know. So if it's the place to be, if it's the thing to do, I might actually show up so I can say I've been there, done that. There are people who come, not as many as we'd like to hope, who actually come specifically because they do want to see that special exhibition, or they do want to see, learn specific things that are going on in your institutions. There are people, the anecdote I like to give is, I used to be, I haven't done it in a while. I used to love to go scuba diving. But since I only go scuba diving irregularly, I would make it a practice before I would go scuba diving to visit my local aquarium as a way to refresh my memory about all the fish that I was going to see, because I could walk around with a field guide, which is a lot easier to do in an aquarium than it is underwater, and remind myself what all these different fish look like so I could identify them when I'm underwater. So I was using that institution in a very specific way as a professional hobbyist. How many of you, when you visit another city, go to the museum in that place? Because you're all professionals, and that's what you do when you go to another place. You want to, you may be interested in their collections, but you're also trying to figure out what are they doing there? What kinds of things can I learn from that experience? And then finally, there are people who come to our institutions not to read labels, not to learn in the traditional sense, but just to get away, to recharge their batteries, to have some space, to have some time to enjoy the architecture, the beauty of things. People come for all these reasons. So this happened to be the Arkin data. They use different language, but you can recognize what it is. The top line is Arkin. Unfortunately, this didn't communicate very well. The white line is other art museums, and the bottom blue line is just, by comparison, all the museums in Denmark. And the details aren't important, except that you can see that there is a distribution. So people are coming to this institution for different reasons. But again, these aren't people who are rechargers. These are people who've come on this day for that purpose. And tomorrow, they could come to be inquisitive. Or they could come with their child and be a facilitator. So here's what my research has shown. The good news is this approach now is, well, it's about 5 or 6 years old now. I mean, actually, the original work that original publication I did on this was 2006. I wrote a book about this that came out in 2009. It's now 2013. And finally, people are beginning to use this, as you did here in Denmark. People have used it all in literally dozens of countries, hundreds of museums with thousands of visitors. And the good news is you can, in fact, subdivide people into these categories. But the question is, does that mean anything? I could equally have said that what's really important is to categorize visitors based on their eye color, and we could successfully collect data and divide visitors by eye color. But the question is, would that mean anything? And in part, the jury's still out. But I think what's really important to keep in mind is that there's nothing sacred about these categories. Don't assume that these 6 categories are fixed, permanent, any more than any other categories you may have used. These represented, it was a snapshot in time of what, by and large in the US, but it's been validated in other countries, visitors to most museums most of the time seem to think were the reasons for coming. I just was in Colorado at a museums conference there, Colorado-Wyoming State Museums Conference, and the Denver Zoo has been using this model and been collecting data, and I thought it was wonderful. They didn't just trust my categories, they went and literally talked to their visitors. They discovered that, lo and behold, what a surprise, that an awful lot of visitors were showing up at the Denver Zoo on nice days. They didn't come in the rain. And they perceived that the Denver Zoo was a really great place to go on a beautiful day. And so for that institution, one of their categories, however they frame it, it's more of a recreational. They're more akin to a park than they are to a museum. And for their visitors, That's an important category. That's an important reason why people show up. And therefore, you need to pay attention to that. Because what's really important here is why the public visits your museum. And so you need to figure out what are, the fancy word is affordances, but basically, what is your institution? How does that speak to the people who visit your institution? What do they think they can get out of that experience? And that's why they're coming. They're not coming because they're 30. They're not coming because they're well educated. They're not coming for any of those other reasons. They're coming because they think there's a match between what they perceive your institution affords and what they perceive are their needs. And when that works, life is good. When it doesn't work, they don't come. So why is this useful? That's the bottom line. Why would knowing why people show up be useful? Well, the good news is people really do show up for these reasons, or some variation of these reasons. So that's good to know. It's always good to know why people show up at your institution. But that's not where it stops. It turns out that these expectations create a trajectory for the visit. So if I've come to support the learning of my child, lo and behold, how will I use your museum? I'll use it to support the learning of my child. If I've come today to see what's here because I've heard it's a cool place, I'm going to come and try and verify that it's a cool place and that there's something that interests me. That's how I'm going to use your space. These become a basic trajectory for the visitor. They become self-fulfilling. Not only do they become self-fulfilling in terms of how people use the space, lo and behold, it also turns out that that's how people remember it. So, if I came to your museum to support the learning of my child, I use your museum to support the learning of my child, and I remember the museum as a place that was really good at supporting the learning of my child, to the extent that it did. And more importantly, I then tell my friends, that place is really good for supporting the learning of children. You should take your child there. And it turns out that that's how your institution develops a public perception of what it affords. It's this whole cycle. Because I've heard that this place is good for this, I go to do this. I then discover that I can do that there. I tell other people who then come to satisfy the same set of needs, and they tell other people. And something on the order of 80 to 90% of all your visitors show up because of word of mouth, because somebody told them it's a good place to go to do that. So they come and do that. So understanding why people come turns out to be a really useful thing, not because we can segment our audiences that way. That's not very meaningful. It's important because it's actionable. It gives us a sense of how we can make sense of our institutions relative to our visitors and actually support their experiences. So, remember, what do people remember and learn? 2 out of the 4 of those are directly related to their expectations for why they came in the first place. Now, they also bumped into things that they found novel, which was not about their expectations necessarily. It also was supported by things they did later, which may or may not be related to their expectations. But 2 out of the 4 reasons, 2 out of the 4 things that contribute to what people learn and remember are based on their expectations for why they were coming in the first place. Because literally, what is going to make, this is a big one, what is going to make it a positive emotional experience for me? Using that example again. If I came to support the learning of my child, what's going to be a really emotional high for me is when my child gets excited and I perceive that he or she learned something. Because then it satisfies the fact that I justified why I came here in the first place. On the other hand, if I came to say, I just want to see if I can find something cool here, when I find something cool, then that becomes emotionally satisfying for me, and that becomes memorable. So, what are the implications for practice? At the most basic level, if we knew why people came, maybe we could be more successful at helping them enjoy their experience and fulfilling their experience. One of the challenges of the 21st century museum is actually being relevant in the 21st century. Because museums were basically creations of an industrial age, it was a one-size-fits-all world, mass production. We come from a legacy of mass production. We need to begin to move towards customized personal experiences. This is a baby step in that direction. The other thing, in a world of accountability, this begins to help us understand how we are perceived by the world out there. So you may think that you support these kinds of experiences, but when you talk to the public and they say, we come for these reasons, that's giving you some information about how the public perceives you. And then probably, perhaps, as important, if not more important, this gives us a strategy for understanding how to attract visitors, not just visitors who already come. It does help us in that way. You should all look at your websites. Look at the profile of your visitor. If you have a lot of rechargers who come to your museum, what are you showing on your website that would suggest that it's a good place to come for that purpose? If you attract a lot of facilitators, what is on your website that would suggest that it's a good place? They're not coming to see your stuff. They're coming to do things together, socially. Is that what you're conveying on your website? But more importantly, and I'll just leave at this thought, this also is the way to think about how we attract visitors who don't come. Because the bottom line is these motivations are not unique to the people who come to your museum. What is unique is only the people who come to your museum are the people who think that your institution can support those needs. You know, I don't care whether I'm from Afghanistan, Turkey, or northern Denmark. If I have children, I want to support the needs of my children. But I may not think that your museum is a place that I can go to support the needs of my children. So it doesn't matter what my social class is. It does matter whether I perceive that this is an institution that could meet those needs. And so if we want to reach out and broaden our audiences, we need to think about, why do people not think that museums are places that could support the kinds of needs that the people who do go to museums think they do? So I'll end on that. Thanks.